When God chose your kind as the object of his love, I was the first in all heaven to bow down before you. My love, my hope for mankind was no less than his. But I have watched you trample that gift. I've watched you kill each other over race and greed, wage war over dust and rubble and the words in old books. And yet in the midst of all this darkness, I see some people who will not be bound. I see some people who will not give up, even when they know all hope is lost. Some people who realize that being lost is so close to being found.
Happy heresies, and welcome to the desert of the real. Welcome to the inner sanctum of gnosis in the outer rectums of reality. Welcome with kindness and love to Aon Byte Gnostic Radio, broadcast at the virtual Alexandria, that state of mind where east meets west, through the God above God that can. You have fallen into a rabbit hole and tech wormhole and Loki's bunghole to enjoy the only authentic webcast adequately dealing with the world's most important and least known heretics, the Gnostics, as well as their brethren in the esoterica and Dionysian free thought.
Devils! Blasphemers! Pray to your heathen god, while in the Lord's name we cast you out.
We shy away from scholarly pontification and definitely stay away from New Age babble. You know, the milli-vanilli, lip-syncing theologies that borrow and dilute from those who really made a difference in history. And this week's show with Yan Irving certainly touches upon New Age and its very dark underbelly. So prepare to have more sacred cows slaughtered, along with your mind expanded and reality disbanded, which we do so well here at Aon Byte Gnostic Radio.
Because if we can't protect the Earth, you can be damn well sure we'll avenge it.
We don't take prisoners but liberate them. We are not the final authority on anything, but hope to be an endless possibility for everything, including finding your Transformers Allspark. We are not here to make a better world, but offer you the blueprints to build a better inner world. And we are not bigoted, but certainly enjoy a nice snifter of political incorrectness, along with our Lewinsky penetrating cigars of gnosis.
You don't know what you're talking about, do you?
We are the lords of deconstruction, the revenge of the myth, and the word made on flesh. We are modern-day Tom Sawyers with our mean stride, our mind not for rent to any god or government. Always so hopeful, yet always so discontent. We are more human than human, the embodiment of the archetypal forces behind the world of forms, and the eternal soundtrack of the counterculture. Let me give you a passage from the Nag Hammadi Library's Allogenes, or Stranger, that elucidates our both sacred and profane adventure. There was within me a stillness of silence, and I heard the blessedness whereby I knew my real self. And I turned to myself and saw the light that surrounded me, and the good that was in me. I became divine. On a more skeptic, yet just as mystic level, let me quote author Eli Wiesel, who said, "The real joy of God is to be defeated by man."
What's God? Well, you know, when you want something really bad and you close your eyes and you wish for it, God's the guy that ignores you.
And how does it start? This stealing of the fire of the gods and kindling our own inner holy flame. Not with a single step of a stupid journey of 1,000 miles, because the journey has no end or beginning, and we've been on it for lifetimes. No, with simply writing your own gospel and living your own myth in your present chimp incarnation. By suddenly finding yourself face to face with your childhood self, who will ask you, how are the dreams we promised to make true coming along? What went wrong? How do we get back to shining like a crazy diamond again?
It's been a brilliant journey of self-awakening. Now you've simply got to ask yourself this. What is happiness to you?
Redemption is around the corner, waiting with the Shekinah. Second and endless opportunities are available. Just have a conversation with your dreaming childhood self. Break the mind-forged manacles William Blake wrote about, and the black iron prison Philip K. Dick lived through once upon a Vallis.
You will face evil, and you will defeat it. Even the smallest person can change the course of the future.
I am Abraxas, your Diogenes guide with his torch of holy cynicism, taking you through the castle of Circe and her hexes of amnesia, ignorance, and the cosmic katzenjammer that has turned you into, as Jane's Addiction sang, pigs in Zen. After all, it was the existentialist philosopher Heidegger and the teacher of the great Gnostic scholar Hans Jonas who said truth is breaking things down until you reach a point called removing all forgetfulness.
Some people lose their faith because heaven shows them too little. But how many people lose their faith because heaven shows them too much?
I broadcast in my mortal incarnation of Miguel Connor in the lawful dystopia of Chicago, patiently waiting for the beginning of the world. I am the voice in the wilderness, crying out every week for your indwelling Christ to be baptized in the Jordans of individuality. I am here to midwife contraband truths from the wombs of your imagination that will set you ultimately free.
One imagination at a time, free from the influence of another.
I am here to proclaim the Evangelion of the Joker and the Thief, as well as the gospel of the drive-through Jesus.
Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition!
And on this approximately September 22nd, the year of our demiurge 2012, we have the pleasure of being joined again by my friend, fellow podcaster, and one of my favorite independent scholars. As mentioned, that is Yan Irving, co-author of Astrotheology and Shamanism, author of The Holy Mushroom, Evidence of Mushrooms in Judeo-Christianity, and co-producer of the DVD, The Pharmacratic Inquisition. It's the fourth time Yan has graced the virtual Alexandria, and I would not wait a goblin's fart before you downloaded all of his interviews, found out our archive of past shows. For more information on Yan and his sacrilegious ventures, please visit his website, gnosticmedia.com.
What, did you go to weed college?
As said at the beginning of the introduction, before you drank that ayahuasca pan-galactic gargle blaster because of my insufferable palaver, get ready to slaughter more sacred cows. We have a very intriguing and lightning rod interview, my beloved truth seekers.
What is it? A secret that can no longer be kept.
Jan's latest scholarship reveals that the Entheogen movement was orchestrated by a corporate/government cabal intending to destabilize the population before pruning its ranks. It is truly a eugenics psych-op, spearheaded by the elite of the West. The operation, Generations in Execution, has stripped the reasoning abilities of our culture. It manifested through the occult, hippie, and New Age dispensations, culminating with the noble but toothless Occupy Wall Street.
If I don't finish my meditation, I tend to get a little cranky.
Some of the architects and executioners include such esoteric icons as Gordon Wasson, Terence McKenna, Aldous Huxley, and Carlos Castañeda. we go deep into the rabbit hole of this Darwinian secret brotherhood to understand how the spiritual tools of indigenous people were turned into a dark toxin, destroying the very soul of Western culture.
Screw that. You think you guys are heroes for killing innocent people?
It's because of assholes like you that we're even in this fucking place, you fucking cowards!
Well, maybe if the people in your country stopped eating donuts and started realizing what their government is doing to the world, assholes like us wouldn't exist.
Fuck you! Donuts are awesome!
They're delicious.
I think Jan's findings have much merit, and he'll be the first one to say that he would welcome sober input and constructive challenge. Not easy, because many of the figures just mentioned, and more in our interview, are basically popes of the esoterica. I've always contended that the New Age movement was basically evil at its core, in the Gnostic sense of being corrupt and deficient. But I chalk most of it up to the road to hell paved with good intentions trope that is part of most human structures in the Kenoma. John certainly gives teeth, or maybe fangs, to my views, and so do other scholars, one of the main ones being Gary Lachman, in our Aon Byte interview and his great books, Politics and the Occult and Turn Off Your Mind, The Mystic 60s and the Dark Side of the Age of Aquarius.
Someday a real rain will come and wash all this scum off the streets.
Gary reveals that greed, runaway social experimentation, and bigotry are just as endemic in the occult scene as they are in the orthodox scene. The classic Gnostics would say to all of this, duh, humans are humans, dude. The genetic code of the universe ain't gonna change because you're high on drugs or high on the Holy Spirit.
Are you a clergyman or just a PR man?
When you come right down to it, Mr. Carter, is there any difference?
Of course, we can't forget that many of the esoteric luminaries of the 19th and 20th centuries were men of their times. They were swept away by the zeitgeist of a Darwinian wind and its brave new world of case systems. The ideas of a master race who knew better, superiority to the poor Mongoloids and Negroids, and the responsibility of the educated whites to embrace benign fascism was thick in the air. This basically racist, elitist attitude influenced theosophy and other alternative spiritualities as much as it did the Third Reich.
Every species can smell its own extinction. The last ones left won't have a pretty time of it. And in 10 years, maybe less, the human race will just be a bedtime story for their children. A myth. Nothing more.
So it's no stretch to think all of this would have trickled down on some level to the psychedelic movement and into the New Age movement. And it's even less of a stretch that human demiurges in government, corporations, or communities would have at some point exploited Entheogens, subconscious bigoted views, and the notion that to make a better, eco-friendly omelet, we gotta break some middle-class eggs. Like the Gnostic sage Basilides said, evil settles on reality like rust on iron.
This is now the United States of Zombieland.
It's everywhere, and there is little anyone can do but be vigilant, aware, and conscious. The Gnostics had a sense of urgency and paranoia for a reason, my beloved truth seekers. Ah, what a mess. A circle jerk of archons with us in the middle. Third eye sticky with amnesia baby gravy.
Sell crazy someplace else. We're all stocked up here.
But here at Aon Byte, we are trying to bring out phoenixes out of these middle-class eggs before they go into the omelette frying pan of Oprah and eventually into the fire of Satan. I like John Lennon's approach. He said that if you want to bring something down, make sure you have something better to replace it with. and that all movements will eventually go stale and crusty like a Kardashian thong. Sharks need to keep moving to survive. We true seeker warriors need to keep being nomads with gonads in order to keep growing spiritually and intellectually. Like I always say, run with those seeking the truth, avoid those who have found it. The Gospel of Thomas advises we become a passerby. The Sufis say life is a bridge you must cross and not build upon. And Jesus, in the Gospel of Luke, warns that he who has his hands on the plow and looks back is not worthy of the kingdom. And so forth.
We just had a near-life experience! Hitting bottom isn't a weekend retreat. It's not a goddamn seminar. Stop trying to control everything and just let go.
I did mention in last week's show that my computer is dying and nothing has changed. Fortunately, Yan, as a fellow podcaster, helped me out and around this problem, making the interview and the show a reality. But I still will have to take a sabbatical until I can get the archons out of my equipment. So please support Aon Byte Gnostic Radio in any way you can. Yan and I are independent broadcasters, tempests in the teapots of corporate media. Stop being teabagged by misinformation and attention span killing shows. And you don't have to, because we in the alternative media offer endless possibilities in the desert of the real.
See all this potential, and I see it squandered. God damn it, an entire generation pumping gas, waiting tables, slaves with white collars.
But we need your help, a few shekels here and there. But enough of my drivel. On to Yan Irving and a staggering view up the skirt of the psychedelic movement. Steiner. Where is Rudolf Steiner?
This is weed. That's Alabama Kush. That's only the finest. So you get high and then you put other people who smoke weed in jail? Duh. That's so hypocritical.
Hey,
oh, yeah? Well, let me ask you something, Kumar. You like giving hand jobs?
No, sir.
You like getting hand jobs?
Yeah.
All right, well, that makes you a fucking hypocriticizer, too. So shut the fuck up and smoke my weed.
This is the Aon Byte interview, and with us we have the pleasure of being joined by my friend Yan Irving to discuss some amazing research he has been involved with lately, and certainly controversial, but definitely mind-blowing. How are you doing today, Yan?
Good. How are you today, McGill?
Just great. Again, thanks for joining us. So why don't you tell us about this research that you've been involved with lately?
Oh, well, let's see. Well, it's been some exciting stuff. I've been digging through a lot of major university archives and digging up a lot of research on the backgrounds of some of the key players in the psychedelic movement and psychedelic revolution, and documents that cause a lot of cognitive dissonance in people who, primarily religious, zealot, fanatic types who have these beliefs in psychedelia and mushrooms that are really no different from your typical, Christian or Jewish zealot. So, it's been interesting finding these things and having these primary documents and seeing what they say, and then see all of the stuff out in the public that people believe, and see the attacks from people against my work. And I should say the most interesting thing about the attacks against my work on Wasson, my newest piece that came out 2 weeks ago on Terence McKenna and the Esselin Institute and Aldous Huxley, etc., is that none of the attackers have actually read the work or studied through the citations. And that's just what's the most mind-boggling. They claim that the research isn't there. I'll lay it all out, but it's this cognitive dissonance caused by these these coincidence theorists. They think that you can have 20 or 30 or 40 different coincidences in a tight group of people, and they can't see an agenda there. And And I just find it phenomenal. And it seems that no amount of research or citations, primary documentation, or otherwise is enough to get these people to put their thinking before their emotions and look at the evidence before they judge it. I mean, it would be like if you could imagine going into a court of law and trying to present a case to a judge who absolutely refused to look at any of your evidence or materials and then decided that he was educated enough to judge the case, or a teacher who would give you an F on a paper without ever reading it and then says your paper is wrong, but then goes into some tangent about how they absolutely refuse to read the paper just because of the premise of what it is, even though they have no idea whatsoever of the actual contents. So this is the sort of thing that I've been dealing with. It's really interesting because following other researchers in the past who've had to deal with this kind of public idiocy, it's really interesting to finally be in that seat now and see it sort of from the other side, see all of these attacks come in from these people who are just completely incompetent and incapable of reading something before they judge it.
But how did you feel, Jan, when you started doing the research and you started seeing this pattern? And
I was shocked.
I mean, these are luminaries.
Sure, I was shocked because, what a lot of people don't know that are attacking me, especially after putting out my McKenna piece on the 28th, is that between 2001 and 2004, I put out about 70 hours of the McKenna archives that are available out there today. And until Lorenzo and a couple other people put out other material, about 70 or 80% of the McKenna material available from 2004 up until 2009 or so came from me. So, I see that, and, I grew up reading these books and believing these stories about Gordon Wasson and Terence McKenna and Aldous Huxley. I studied all of these guys for years, but what made me start questioning their backgrounds was when I started research for my second book, The Holy Mushroom. In that book, I lay out line by line what took place between Gordon Wasson and John Allegro and the entire communication failure that happened there, and how Wasson essentially launched a major campaign against Allegro. This campaign against Allegro was taken as fact for about 4 decades, and then it later came out that Wasson admitted to both Jack Hare and Professor Carl Ruck that he had never even read Allegro's book. So again, We're dealing with the same sort of thing. People just attacking research that they've never read, and Wasson made up a whole bunch of lies about Allegro, saying that he had some money agenda and all of this stuff. And all of these things I laid out in my book, The Holy Mushroom, that I published in October of 2008. And interestingly, 2 days ago, Red Ice Radio published this interview with Simon G. Powell, where he went on this 25-minute screed against my work, which he'd obviously never even read an iota of, making up all of these pure lies against my work and everything, because these guys have all of these agendas that the official story is real. And Simon Powell has published this book that's really, it's called The Psilocybin Solution. It's really a regurgitation of everything that Wasson and Terence McKenna put out. And I've been reading through it the last couple of days, getting a kick out of how he just sort of regurgitates all the common themes. But then again, what happens is because he's just regurgitates these themes, then, that means that if he's wrong and my research is correct, then he's published a whole bunch of garbage. So, of course, rather than, being honest and looking at the research and working for truth, which is what we should be striving for, he's got to protect his agenda and attack me publicly, using name calling and appeal to ridicule and all of these fallacies. He didn't address a single point that I actually presented in my work, and any points that he kind of sort of addressed, he actually completely misconstrued and took out of context and what was actually written. And then at the end of the interview, he admitted that he never read any of my work and that he didn't need to follow up on any conspiracy theory or whatever, because he's got a good bullshit detector. Never mind that you'd actually have to study something and look through the citations to see if they check out and whatnot to, be able to see what is bullshit or not. His concept of bullshit and being able to judge bullshit is somehow, just by osmosis, and just, sitting on a pillow and meditating and saying, well, the mushrooms told me that that's wrong. And so I'm going to go on the radio and do a 25-minute screed against Yan Irving. And of course, he couldn't even pronounce my name right through the entire show. And Lana had tried to correct him a half a dozen or a dozen times. But, throughout the entire interview, he mispronounces my name and all this just really immature, childish stuff. And I just, I feel really embarrassed for these guys. I mean, because the facts are there and they're going to stand for themselves, and they're not going to go away just because these people bury their heads in the sand and yell la, 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 la really loud so that none of the information gets in. And so, this information is going to spread and grow, and it's going to not go away. And they're eventually going to have to sit down and look at it, or everybody's going to realize that they are the fools and buffoons that they are.
So, Jan, why don't we talk about the research itself, and so the listener can understand how mind-blowing it is. Your research reveals that you have this sort of eugenics, entheogen cabal that has been going on for generations, which spearheaded the psychedelic movement, but not for altruistic purposes.
Sure.
We're all led to believe.
Right. Well, what I began researching was the background of the Esselin Institute and everybody involved there, and checking out who they were related with, who they worked with, and getting into their books and citations and seeing what they actually said and what kind of ideas these people were promoting. So as it turns out, the Esselin Institute, for instance, up in Northern California in Big Sur, was founded primarily by Michael Murphy and Dick Price in the 1960s with the help and funding of Aldous Huxley. Now, of course, Aldous Huxley is the author of the Brave New World and the Brave New World Revised and all this stuff. And if people, in fact, go in and just read his book, The Brave New World Revised or Revisited, whatever, number 2, they'll see in his own words that he's laying out all of these agendas in his own words. But, of course, nobody will actually go out and read his material. But as it turns out, Julian Huxley was a major eugenicist and humanist. Julian Huxley was Aldous Huxley's brother. And Julian Huxley wrote nearly a dozen books on eugenics and humanism and transhumanism and all of these themes that, interestingly, turn up at the Esselin Institute and being propagated out of the Esselin Institute by key figures like Terence McKenna, like Alan Watts, like Allen Ginsberg and Ken Kesey and these guys. And so when we get into the actual background of these people, we can see that what Aldous Huxley is promoting and selling through the Esselin Institute is exactly the ideas that his brother Julian set forth. Now, Julian Huxley is the founder of the concept of modern synthesis, which is sort of a lot of Darwin's theories started being disproved, and then they came up with neo-Darwinism, and then it went into Mendelism, and then it went into Julian Huxley's modern synthesis, and then now it's going into Pigliosi and Muller's idea of this, the evolution, the extended synthesis. So rather than admitting that and just coming straight out and saying that the ideas of Darwin and Julian Huxley were wrong, and here's the new information, and here's how this stuff would work better. What they do is this kind of mealy-mouth song and dance of showing the errors in Darwin's work and then building this extension or bridge over to this new work, all the while saying that Darwin's work wasn't wrong, while they give page after page after page of examples of where his work was, in fact, wrong. So it's kind of this cognitive dissonance. But the reason why I bring up Darwin is because Julian Huxley's work is all based off of that. But see, Aldous and Julian's grandfather was this guy by the name of Thomas Huxley. And Thomas Huxley, he was actually, he worked directly with Darwin. And so Thomas Huxley, in fact, was considered Darwin's bulldog. Anybody, and I've got this brain database up on my website that Simon Powell and these people attack because they don't know how to follow the these citations and research, they open it up and they see a bunch of lines, but they don't know how to click on the citations and actually read them, which are actually right there on the screen in front of them. So I don't know what the problem is with their lack of ability to read. There's over 6,000 citations in this database, and these guys are, each one of them seems completely incompetent to read a single one of them. But Thomas Huxley created, and this can be found on Wikipedia or anywhere, created this organization called the X Club, where he brought in 8 academics that he worked with to promote Darwin's ideas. And so this little group, in fact, this X Club is where we get Evolution Mutant X-Men comic series from.
Stan Lee and Jack
Kirby. And in fact, also this X Club, this X Club has a lot of really interesting things, but Jack Kirby and Stan Lee also produced another series, or actually Jack Kirby did, called The Fourth World. And interestingly, when you get in and start studying Agenda 21 and the background behind all of this, you'll see that the UN put on a number of conferences called the Fourth World Wilderness Conferences. And the Fourth World Wilderness Conferences were all about creating this idea of a world citizen to accept their globalist elitist agenda and to propagate it out into society. So this Fourth World Wilderness Conference, it was sort of aspects of mind control that they would put out in the public. And you can hear, for instance, Edmund de Rothschild speak about this directly in George Hunt's unsaid UNCED video that's also posted up on my website with the Darwin Huxley paper there. And people can listen to Edmund de Rothschild talk about this stuff directly himself out of his own mouth. It's no conspiracy theory. I mean, it's primary documentation. You can't get any more primary than a recording of someone speaking the words out of their own mouth. And so so Jack Kirby's Fourth World comic series was, of course, all about somebody who wanted to mind control the whole world, right, for his own benefit. And so there's just absolutely no way that you could have Stan Lee and Jack Kirby publishing these exact same ideas that were being discussed at the X Club and at the Macy conferences and at the unsaid environmental conferences. There's just no way that they could have the exact same themes in their comic series unless they were on the inside of it all. And so, this is the issue here. But, Thomas Huxley worked directly with Darwin. And he was a member of the Royal Society, which gave out the Darwin Awards and things like this, and the Copley Medal as well. And, these guys would give these awards to each other. So like Darwin, they would give out the Darwin Medal to Francis Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace and John Haldane, which, interestingly, all of these guys were major influences on Terence McKenna's work, which he admits in his own words, in his own work. So it's no conspiracy theory. People can go and read the stuff for themselves. See, the issue is that people won't take the time to get a background understanding on Agenda 21, on the Fourth World Wilderness Conferences, etc., so that they can understand exactly how McKenna is selling these exact same themes. Like John B.S. Haldane, he was another eugenicist. He was famous for the quote that my own suspicion is that the universe is not only queerer than we can suppose, or is not only queerer than we suppose, it's queerer than we can suppose. And then, of course, Terence McKenna took that quote and said it's not just stranger than you suppose, it's stranger than you can suppose. And so Haldane was another one of these eugenicists. In fact, he was a major influence on Aldous Huxley's book, Brave New World, where a lot of this stuff was put together. Now, interestingly, another person that in Terence McKenna's background that turns up everywhere is this guy, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. And he was a Jesuit priest, and he came up with the idea of the omega point, which later became Terence McKenna's habit and novelty theory mixed in with the I Ching. And Terence just stapled Michael Coe's End of the World scenario from Michael Coe's book on the Maya onto that. And I've put out a lot of research on, showing the origins of 2012 as well. And I did a number of interviews with Professor John Hups over the years. his investigations into that. And his work is actually what led me to discover some of the conclusions that I finally made. Like, it was Professor Hups. He was the one that first informed me that Professor Michael Coe at Yale, who came up with this 2011-2012 Maya theme in his 1966 book on the Maya, that he was actually a CIA agent. And I did check his background, and he was U.S. intelligence in Japan, etc. But this guy, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, he comes up with this omega point theory. And by the way, he's also one of the suspects behind the Piltdown Man and the Piltdown hoax, which was this academic fraud where they supposedly found Darwin's missing link in England and were selling this whole theme. So it doesn't seem that committing fraud and these other things was beyond them to sell these ideas. But at the end of the unsaid video, George Hunt's unsaid video that I just mentioned with Edmund de Rothschild, in the last few seconds, we hear him citing Pierre Teilhard de Chardin on exactly how they plan to push this, this idea of getting people to, accept this world citizen sort of idea. And Pierre Teilhard de Chardin happens to be one of the professors and teachers for another one of McKenna's major influence, a guy by the name of Marshall McLuhan. And so Marshall McLuhan is, just tied right in there. Marshall McLuhan, in fact, did his PhD thesis on the Trivium, which I think you and I have talked about in the past. Well, and Marshall McLuhan originally came up with Timothy Leary's idea of tune in, turn on, drop out. And then, which I have the episode here back later on, Watts and Houston Smith and Allen Ginsberg and Leary all met up on Alan Watts's boat, and they had a whole conversation about how to sell this tune in, turn on, drop out meme. And that is actually can be found on Lorenzo's podcast. And it's episode number 193 for those who are in doubt and don't want to, believe me. You can actually go and hear these guys in their own words do this. This covers just a couple of their influences. Now, I should also mention that Marshall McLuhan was a major influence on Dr. Ted Kaczynski, the infamous Unabomber. And for those who have seen the documentary film The Net, Ted Kaczynski was actually trying to shut a lot of this stuff that was going on down, and he realized what was going on through the Stanford Research Institute up at Stanford University and the ARPANET and mind control things that they were putting on there, and so he tried to shut them down. And interestingly, SRI, the Stanford Research Institute, is actually tied directly with the Esselin Institute, as well as they are tied directly to the Tavistock Institute. And the Tavistock Institute is behind, Tavistock Institute for Human Behavior is behind all kinds of this stuff for anybody who actually wants to spend the time to research and not just to, make a bunch of appeal to ridicule fallacies that don't debunk the research at all. Just saying you're wrong because that doesn't debunk the research. I mean, I get attacks by people that's their whole argument, literally. In fact, day before yesterday, somebody tried to attack me with exactly that argument. He posted up something on my website. You're wrong, laughing out loud. Ha 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 ha. That was his whole argument.
This begs the question: where exactly does the road of entheogens and eugenics meet? I'm getting that basically you have a group that believes that you can use psychedelics for evolution, but of course for the group. But
hold on, let's back up there because see what you have is two different things: what the elites use them for and believe, and see, as I showed in my book Astrotheology and Shamanism, as well as my book The Holy Mushroom, is that there's an ancient tradition of these things being used in the Christian churches and in Judaism and the like. And so what we see is this priestly class sort of elite have used these things for themselves while keeping them from the public. But the issue in giving them to the public isn't, you just hand them to people and suddenly they're enlightened and they know everything and that's it. There's an issue because people with just the psychedelics who do them without anything else, they're very easily mind controlled, such as just with logical fallacies alone. For instance, anybody who studied a logic class in college could control an entire herd of hippies just using logical fallacies. So clearly, just doing a bunch of psychedelics doesn't set you permanently free. While you're in that state, you will break free temporarily from the conditioning. But as I have been saying for a number of years now, psychedelics should only be used in tandem with the trivium being grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Grammar asks who, what, where, and when. Logic answers why and removes the contradictions. And then rhetoric explains how. And when you have a systematic method to process the information that you get through the psychedelic experience or through anywhere else in your life, you have a means of fact-checking it in reality before you spread mental viruses onto others. And so, there is this history there of the elites and the priest class using these things, as well as in shamanism, etc. And in fact, in many cultures in South America, women and other groups are not allowed to take them. This is part of the control mechanism. And in fact, Professor Marlene Dobkin-de Rios has gone in somewhat in her work on how the peak experience can actually be used when somebody's in that state to sort of, the shaman or somebody with ill intention could actually stick their own program into you while you're in that peak state. And so this is the issue of doing them without having a systematic method like the Trivium. It's not at all, and I've said this 100 times and people still can't hear it, it's not at all to say that psychedelics or entheogens don't have spiritual value. They very much do. But you need to understand the operating system or the control structure, which is based on the trivium and quadrivium of the ancient classical 7 liberal arts, if you want to understand how these substances are used for manipulation and control. And, if you watch an hour or two of, say, one of my videos on my website of the logical fallacies in the trivium, you might even just with that have enough to be somewhat protected against those who would be predators against you. And another illusion that people have is that they don't have any predators, and they can't see any agenda behind why the elites and these people would do these things. And it's simply that we're in a race war or an ethnic war. And as many people know, the elites and Agenda 21 is all about reducing the world's population down to about 1 billion. So the trick is because the middle class has been dumbed down through the compulsory education system, as people can read about, etc., they can see how the compulsory education system has dumbed them down. And when they study the trivium, they can begin to replace some of those things that were removed from them. So, along with the trivium and everything, you can use these substances very advantageously and simultaneously protect yourself from any predators out there who would want to take advantage of you. Simon Powell on his Red Ice radio screed the other day went into, it was just absolutely ridiculous that I could say that Alan Watts had a handler and that he could be involved in all of this stuff. And I never said that Alan Watts had a handler with the CIA, which was a straw man on Simon's part, and he made up about 100 flat-out lies during that interview with Red Ice and 314. But what I said was that it appears that Alan Watts' handler was Aldous Huxley. And Aldous Huxley and Julian Huxley were running this entire program with the Esselin Institute, with SRI. And Alan Watts admits in his own words that Huxley was a major influence on him, as in fact every single one of the key players involved with the psychedelic community either worked directly with Aldous or admit that they were influenced by him. And then when you see that Aldous, and Pierre Teilhard de Chardin and Julian Huxley and Thomas Huxley and Darwin, how they're just in this tight little tiny group of people, it's just impossible, this coincidence theory nonsense that these people want to believe. So for instance, many of the people who I've been researching in their own backgrounds, in their own words, who say Aldous Huxley was one of their largest influences. We have Al Hubbard, who is MK Ultra. We have Alan Watts, who's admitted that, Aleister Crowley, Bill Wilson, who founded AA, Carlos Castaneda. We have George Orwell, Gregory Bateson, who is also absolutely 100% for sure MK Ultra. Gregory Bateson was at the Macy conferences where they developed the idea of the world citizen as well as MK Ultra. Humphrey Osmond is there. Houston Smith is there. Ken Kesey is there. Michael Murphy of the Esselin Institute, Ram Dass, who's also Richard or Dick Alpert, Terence McKenna admits in his own stuff, his own work, repeatedly. McKenna cites constantly Aldous Huxley's works when McKenna sells his eugenics and feminism and humanism stuff. And in fact, McKenna from his Maui lecture from 1994 says, this woman is asking him about this book, Mutant Message, that's been completely proved as fraudulent. In fact, the Aborigines of Australia sued this woman and demanded that she stop. Hides behind the mushroom tells him everything to say, right? Even though when you get into his key influences, Teilhard, McLuhan, Desjardins, Huxley, Julian Huxley, etc., every single one of them is involved in eugenics, humanism, and humanism is essentially just eugenics, and feminism, etc. And recently I had Karen of Girl Rights What on my show, she completely debunks the feminism movement as essentially a dialectic to divide and conquer, and they spread a bunch of false information about the structure of our society being patriarchist, and got women to essentially, stop wanting kids and stop wanting to get married. And of course, the family is the core of our society. So that was part of how they broke the society apart was through this feminism movement, which, like I said, if people want more on that, they can listen to Karen of Girl Rights What. But in this lecture, after this woman asks McKenna this question, McKenna comes back and he says, okay, that's part of what the mushrooms said. And that may seem radical in some circles, but not here perhaps. It also said something else which I rarely mention, but since you brought it up, there are not only too many people, there are too many men. And I would be very interested in seeing a set of social policies, insurance policies put in place to limit male birth. And then he continues down a little bit further and he says, I'm a feminist, but I don't read the literature or try to understand all of the factions and theories. As a humanist, I advocate a reduction in male birth. This is flat out eugenics. And for those of you who are in doubt, again, go study the Karen of Girl Rights What interviews. Study my interview recently with Curtis Duncan, and this is all laid out there. Please do not write me in some tirade because you can't spend time to listen to and study the citations before you get all emotional and upset. So, having said that, these are out of McKenna's own mouth, and he, in his books, he discusses many of these same topics as well. But their whole goal, as I said earlier, through the Macy conferences, where MK Ultra came out of, was this idea of this world citizen that ties literally directly into the UN's Fourth World Wilderness Conferences and the battle over the mind. And under the Fourth World Wilderness Conferences, things that they were focusing on, as I already mentioned, we've got to the dumbing down of compulsory education, which John Taylor Gatto goes into, critical thinking removed from the public schooling, such as the Trivium. We have the December 21st, 2012, end of the world scenario to get everybody to accept this world citizen, and we're evolving and all of this stuff. See, the idea is to get the middle class to stop breeding and having kids and to think that they're enlightened. Meanwhile, they're being totally controlled and led down a wrong, very destructive path. We also have the destruction of the family, destruction of the middle class, feminism, fluoride in the water. Interestingly, the Gaia hypothesis, which Simon Powell and this guy, Johnny Enoch, who's got the Johnny Enoch show. These guys are incapable of, reading anything before they launch their attacks, and they just completely misconstrued everything that I've ever said or published, and ignored all of the citations and created these wild straw man arguments against the work. But so the Gaia hypothesis, for instance, this was created by James Lovelock. James Lovelock, he's tied in, it looks like, with the Fourth World and World Citizen ideas. He's also tied in with the New Age movement. But when I follow James Lovelock up, he was actually involved in the Lindisfarne Association. And when we go there, we see that he was hanging out with Gregory Bateson, who I already mentioned was MKUltra, and Michael Murphy, Ralph Abram, Joan Halifax, Elaine Pagels. All of these people were there. Essentially together, they helped create this idea of the Gaia hypothesis. And so then they, of course, sold these ideas. Like I said, Michael Murphy was there, and he's the owner of the Esselin Institute. And then they promote these ideas out into the public through the Esselin Institute. This is really what the agenda is, and they hide behind, they've usurped the entheogenic or psychedelic experience, or the spiritual aspects of that, for their own agendas, to get people to uncritically accept these, this whole zeitgeist type nonsense. And zeitgeist is selling a pure technocracy, which is a computer controlled world that will control every aspect of your life. How much, it exactly ties into Agenda 21, which all of these smart meters and things that they're putting on people's homes. These things are there to regulate our future use of electricity, so that they can tell us how much and when we're going to use of electricity or water. All of this is coming, and this is all very clearly laid out in the Agenda 21 information for those who want to study it. And of course, a lot of the Agenda 21, the basics, can be found on the UN's own website. I would read their stuff and then get into the actual research that's out there that a lot of people have put out on it. But what we're looking at is Aldous and Julian Huxley were selling, and Julian Huxley, by the way, founded UNESCO, and UNESCO is very much a eugenics organization. I'm just going to see if I can find any of the quotes here. Maybe I didn't save some of them here. But UNESCO is part of the Optimum Population Trust, world government, and globalism. UNESCO was, like I said, founded by Julian Huxley. H.G. Wells was also involved in that. Eric L. Trist, Alexander Meiklejohn, who also comes up previously. He actually founded this experimental college that later on, his college that was out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison spawned another college called the Tussman Experimental College out of Berkeley that Joseph Tussman founded. And this is where Terence McKenna went to school, in fact, is at this Tussman Experimental College at Berkeley. And we see Alexander Meiklejohn as one of the key founders of UNESCO, and Huxley, a part of UNESCO, or being the founder of UNESCO. And then we see Alexander Meiklejohn on the front cover of Henry Luce's Time Life magazine from the 1920s. And of course, I covered the history of Luce's tie-in and all of this with much documentation in my paper on Wasson that I released on May 13th.
So to wit, it's basically give the masses entheogens, water down their resolve, their intelligence, and then try to create a more manageable population.
Let me put it this way. Thomas Huxley was one of the key guys behind the opium smuggling into China in the 1800s that caused the huge uproar. That was Thomas Huxley, people. Now, let me read you this quote. Yeah, here's another one of these clowns that's involved in all of this stuff. This is a guy by the name of Louis Jolyon West. If I can just find his quote here. Let's see, I've got it highlighted in red here. Just a second. It's a real good one, so we don't want to miss it here if I can at all help it. I thought I had it highlighted. Maybe I don't. But, here we go. He says, the role of drugs in the exercise of political control is also coming under increasing discussion. Control can be through prohibition or supply. The total or even partial prohibition of drugs gives the government considerable leverage for other types of control. An example would be the selective application of drug laws against selected components of the population, such as members of certain minority groups or political organizations.
Wow, that is a tangled web.
Yeah, so that, this is what they're doing. What they did was they usurped and corrupted the indigenous religions. Just like the Native American church here, no longer can the Native Americans practice their own religion that they practiced for 10,000 years before we came here. They've got to form a church that is a corporation, of course, and then they can practice their official religion once they're a corporation. And, so all levels of this, they've corrupted from Wasson going down to, and of course, as I talk about in my article, we've got to thank Wasson for uncorking the bottle, but at the same time, this guy is doing all of this mind control stuff. And of course, I found primary documentation that Wasson and Edward Bernays, who is the father of propaganda, they hung out together for at least a decade. And I also found primary documentation, very solid proof that Wasson helped to cover up J.P. Morgan Sr.'s involvement in the Civil War's Hull Carbine affair, where J.P. Morgan Sr. bought a whole bunch of discarded guns from the U.S. government for $3.50 a piece or something, and then sold them back to the government for this huge profit, made like $109,000 or something, and all of these soldiers died from it. And so Wasson, in his book, The Hull Carbine Affair, actually covered that up. And I found the primary letters out of the Professor Andrews archives, I think it was at Yale University, where Wasson and Professor Andrews are actually discussing this and discussing how to cover it all up and everything. And, of course, the attackers refuse to read those citations or anything that are provided right there. They just,
Jan, isn't it just better to believe that Gordon Wasson and his wife were frolicking in the woods and the mushrooms spoke to them? That's better gnosis.
Because all of these guys, they hide behind, just like, any religious fanatic priest, they'll hide behind, Jesus told me or what have you. Well, that's exactly what these guys are doing. It's always the mushroom told me, right? And so it's the exact same thing, just repackaged. It's like the, if I can find it here, it's like that famous quote. Oh, let's see here. I've got it here somewhere. Just give me a second. But, it's like that quote where, first an idea is accepted or is despised and attacked, and then...
then they call you crazy and then they listen to you.
Exactly. That's exactly what they do. But here, I'm just looking for that quote here. It's a really good quote, and probably your whole audience already knows it, but it just so well exemplifies the mentality surrounding this. All truth passes through three stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as being self-evident. So right now we're going through the ridicule and violently opposed stage, right? And so we've got all of these Chris Bennett and Christopher Knowles and Caleb Smith and Simon Powell and a handful of these other guys, but every single one of them has admitted that they didn't read the work when they attacked it. And Chris Knowles, I think he may have been on your show. He's been on my show, and I was really disappointed to see his screeds, is just fallacious nonsense. But his whole argument was that Lyndon LaRouche came up with the same ideas 30 years ago. Therefore, none of my research is original, and I copied it all from Lyndon LaRouche, and therefore I was a fraud. When I asked him if he could cite a single thing that I took or quote a single thing that I took from Lyndon LaRouche, of course he couldn't. Chris Bennett went off for a week about one point that bared absolutely nothing on the conclusion, whether it was Gordon Wasson or one of his partners, Pinkerton, who couldn't remember which pope that Wasson had worked with. It bared nothing on the conclusion, but Bennett went off on this for a week and absolutely refused to read the rest of the article. And then on my Facebook page and on his own Facebook page, he started 2 long threads of name calling against me. And Caleb Smith, of course, did the same thing. And then, of course, we've got 2 days ago, Simon G. Powell, the author of the psilocybin solution book. It's his whole book is just really him regurgitating everything he heard from Wasson. And again, and he admits in his stuff that anything he got wrong, he can just say, well, the mushroom told me, or or I learned it from the mushroom, or whatever. So it's the same repeated theme of not using critical thinking and hiding behind the mushroom. And then anybody who points out this stuff, you attack them like you're some kind of religious zealot. And, the way that these people act around this stuff, it's clear that mushrooms and ayahuasca have become for these people just as dogmatic as the major religions. And that's just very unfortunate, because it doesn't show any amount of open-mindedness. And, these people, all they care is putting the mushroom first. They don't care about putting truth and honesty and integrity first. It's all just, and I hate to put it this way, their delusions of the mushrooms. And they attack me. They'll even attack me for never having done the mushrooms myself, supposedly. Well, here's a news flash, folks. I've done them over 700 times. So chew on that for a while, and then go back and study the citations and read the conclusion of my paper, at least, because what they'll do is they'll attack me. Well, we have got to just destroy you because you're attacking the sanctity of the mushrooms, and the mushrooms are a spiritual thing. Of course, because these morons can't read a goddamn thing, then they miss the conclusion of my Wasson article, where I say very clearly and explicitly, quote, "And maybe it's wishful thinking, but may the mushrooms remain forevermore pure and never again be defiled for the deceitful, irrational agendas of the elite. This essay is dedicated to the honor, purity, and sanctity of the mushrooms and to the Mazatec peoples of Oaxaca, Mexico, especially from Hualta de Jimenez, from which they came, who were also profaned. The Mazatecs had their religion co-opted, their culture infiltrated, their sacrament corrupted and commercialized. A mouse having labored, a mountain was born, but it's the truth that shall set you free." 5, 3, 4. And of course, Miguel, you may just well know what that 5, 3, 4 is. That is the 5 senses, the 3 of the trivium, and the 4 of the quadrivium, and how we go about fact-checking our reality. What people can't understand is that when we put research rather than our conclusions first, then we have to go where the research takes us, not the preconceived ideas that we have of McKenna or Wasson, or that, the entire psychedelic movement is just blowback and that the CIA and the elites were too stupid and didn't know what they were doing. If we realize that there is such a thing as controlled opposition in these sort of things, we can see how these things are done. But we have to put the research first, and we have to allow the research to tell us what's there, and not put our logic before our grammar and force our conclusions onto the research.
Why do they want the population down? So it's just more manageable?
Well, I think
you would think. In Gnosticism, you want more slaves. You want to dilute more idiots.
Ever since Plato, and probably before, you can probably go back to ancient India and the caste system and the Mahabharata and all of this, where a lot of this stuff originated. But they've always been attempting to get rid of the general masses for the elites, for more wealth for themselves, etc. In fact, in one of McKenna's lectures, he makes the false assumption that if we got rid of half the population, we'd all be twice as rich. But, that fails to recognize the corporations and the banks and all of this kind of stuff. See, the elites, what they'll do is they like to create the problems, like Madison Avenue marketing and the destruction of the family, the planned obsolescence, and killing the electric car and banning hemp and all of this stuff. First, they cause these problems, and then when there's a big pollution problem or resource problem, etc., then they turn around and they blame us for it. See, so then even though they don't recognize that they're the very cause of the problem in the first place. So it's just the approach that needs to be taken essentially is the reverse eugenics that they're selling. Rather than trying to get rid of 90% of the regular population, if the regular population just got together and focused on getting rid of this elite 1%, the rest of us would be able to get along in harmony. And I think that we wouldn't have the pollution and resource problems that we have. So, I hate to say it, but, people have to wake up. The elites are trying to kill us, and it's us or them. And if they're violating natural law, then we can immediately use equal and opposite force against them. And of course, for them to enforce any of their laws, they have to use us to do that. People like us are the police and the military and all of this that they use to keep us in control. So once these people begin to wake up to how this whole system works, then we'll be able to finally break down the last little bit of control that the elites, et cetera, have, and put this crap to rest once and for all. I just can't say this enough, and it just seems so absolutely and completely frickin' retarded that anybody should ever have to say it. But, before you know what a book says or what a show says or a movie or whatever, have the brains to read it, hear it, or look at it before you judge it. I mean, it's just real simple common sense, folks. Putting your grammar, your who, what, where, and when before your conclusions or your why. And what they've done is they've gotten everyone to react emotionally and irrationally and base all of their decisions off of their emotions without ever fact-checking a single thing that comes out of their vomitous little mouths.
You bringing up Alan Watts, I immediately had an emotional reaction. Sometimes it's hard to get over that.
Sure.
I'm sure you had many of those
in my early 20s, I used to get up late at night, and in fact, for 10 years, at least 5 years, I used to have a VHS machine hooked up to my stereo system, and I would set it on slow SP record or whatever so that I could get 6-hour recordings on it. And I would record the Roy of Hollywood show on KPFK Los Angeles, who, by the way, Alan Watts connects directly into that, and that's a whole other thing that we'll not get into now. But I would record Roy of Hollywood's entire show, and I would listen to Alan Watts, and I would listen to Dave Emery and all of this stuff. I would listen to the McKenna stuff. Again, most of the McKenna stuff that's out there, folks, came from me in the first place. Get that into your little heads. I put that stuff out there. And at the time, I thought it was a good thing. And then I actually put my emotions aside and my wishful thinking and and psychedelic dreaming. And I picked up the books and I started fact checking. And I had one of those oh fuck moments. And because in some ways, and people will attack me for this as well, I feel partly responsible for McKenna's 2012 meme and all of this other nonsense today because I'm the one that put that stuff out. Now, that's not a valid reason to attack me, folks, because I've provided the citations, and rather than arguing from ignorance and arguing the arbitrary, simply read the articles, go through the citations point by point, and if you do find something that's an error, send me a rational, cogent email showing me the error, showing me your citation that updates or corrects that error. And if we can show that you are correct and that I'm wrong, then we'll simply go and fix it. Just like that, folks. It's really easy. But here's the trick. This is the toughest part for a lot of you out there. You have to be smart enough to read and study the material first. I know it's hard, folks. It's difficult, but it's just right there. And just doing that, you will free your mind. Thanks so much, Miguel.
And there you have it, my beloved truth seekers. Yan Irving on an intriguing interview on what might be a pivotal point in the Entheogen movement. And hopefully the death knell of the New Age movement. Although I doubt it. Because money for nothing and your crystals for free. I want my Deepak TV. Again, Yan is a co-author of Astrotheology and Shamanism, author of The Holy Mushroom, Evidence of Mushrooms in Judeo-Christianity, and co-producer of the DVD, The Pharmacratic Inquisition. It's the fourth time Yan has graced the virtual Alexandria, and I would not wait a Medusa's queef before you download all the interviews. For more information on Yan and his sacrilegious ventures, please visit his website, gnosticmedia.com. Love having guests like Yan on the show. I simply lay back like a new inmate adopted in a prison by an Aryan nation leader and enjoy the ride. It's certainly hard to take a look at our sacred cows. I flinch when he mentioned Alan Watts during our chat, and flinch at the mention of others when I first read his scholarship. Then I had to tell myself again that these were men of a certain time in history, and in the end were flawed. Judge harshly as you want, but expect to be judged harshly as well in 100 years when people ask about such things as, I don't know, how could we have a society with so few women leaders? Why gays and other minorities live in fear? And how did any humane being allow George Lucas to change that scene in Star Wars where Greedo shoots first and not Han Solo? Again, men of their times, doing the best they could. And even Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. had a dark side as well. It's the Kenoma as we know it, and I feel fine. And what would happen if I found out that Valentinus, Carl Jung, and Philip K. Dick were part of a sinister cabal to promote fundamentalism in a backdoor way? It would actually make me more of a Gnostic, my beloved truth seekers. It would make me try harder in this illusionary world to become liberated and not become completely jaded, and find as much compassion for those who have fallen and those who keep falling and those who keep trying. Hell, how do you think the Sethians felt when they realized Jehovah wasn't the supreme being in their early stages? Probably betrayed, relieved, and ultimately hopeful. The Gnostic Mandeans turned on Jesus because of their own gnosis. It happens, we deal, that's how we roll. No sacred cows, no golden calves, and no being raped by bulls in the fields of blind trust. Again, certainly download the other interviews with Yan to understand the Entheogen movement. And we have many other shows on Entheogens and psychedelics in our Altered States section in the archive of past shows. Other than that, I am grateful you came to the virtual Alexandria, oh you veterans of 1,000 psychic wars who have set the controls to the heart of the sun. You done well in our dark odyssey through the gnashing rocks of orthodoxy, all the way to the farthest shores of imagination. We shall continue later and forever in the Gnostic Revolution, in the name of Hypatia of Alexandria and all those who gave their lives to tear the veils of the temple and allow us access to our own lost divinity. I am Abraxas, broadcasting at the virtual Alexandria through the GodAboveGod.com. The road has ended, the song is over. Thought I'd have something more to say. But don't cultivate any troubles, my beloved truth seekers, because like heaven above you, the spy that loved you, I'm keeping all of your secrets safe with me tonight. Hello and goodbye is all.